안녕하세요.
The towering skyscraper of Kang Enterprises gleamed against Seoul's cloudy sky. At the top of the building, Kang Ji-ho, the youngest CEO in the company's history, gazed out over the city with sharp, calculating eyes. Known for his cold demeanor and impeccable discipline, he rarely let his focus stray from work. Relationships were nothing more than unnecessary distractions, and love was a superfluous concept for a man who had built his empire with an iron fist. Downstairs, in the administrative department, Yoon Hana hurried through the narrow corridors. Her shift as an assistant had started less than a week ago, and she already felt buried under a mountain of responsibilities. Since childhood, she had learned that luck and privilege were luxuries she could never rely on. She worked tirelessly to support her sick mother and pay the bills for the small apartment she shared with her younger sister. Despite her exhaustion, Hana never stopped smiling. Her hope and determination were her greatest strengths, even in an environment where everyone saw her as just another disposable employee. That fateful morning, fate decided to play with them. Balancing a stack of documents, Hana rushed down the hallway, the weight of the reports threatening her stability. Just as she turned the corner, her body collided with a firm and imposing figure. The papers flew into the air, scattering across the polished marble floor. She lost her balance for a brief moment, but before she could recover, she heard a low voice, heavy with authority. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Hana's heart pounded as she recognized the owner of that voice. Slowly, she lifted her gaze, feeling the blood drain from her face. It was him. The most powerful man in that building, perhaps, in the entire city. Kang Ji-ho stared at her with an unreadable expression, his dark, piercing eyes fixed on her with a mixture of irritation and curiosity. "I'm so sorry." Hana quickly crouched down, scrambling to gather the scattered papers. Ji-ho remained still, watching her without moving a muscle. His chin was raised, hands tucked into the pockets of his pristine suit. No one ever dared to make mistakes around him, let alone a newly hired assistant. But there was something about her that made him hesitate. Something in her gaze there was no fear, only a mix of surprise and stubbornness. "What's your name?" His voice was low, but each word carried a weight that made Hana hold her breath. She blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Yoon Hana, sir." Seconds stretched into an uncomfortable silence. Their eyes met again, and Ji-ho realized something unsettling couldn't look away. He, a man accustomed to commanding rooms full of influential executives, suddenly felt momentarily disarmed by a simple assistant. It was an unfamiliar discomfort, one that irritated him deeply. "Be more careful next time." His voice was cold and precise. Without another word, Ji-ho turned and continued down the corridor. Hana remained on her knees, finishing gathering the papers as she struggled to steady her breathing. What was that? A shiver ran down her spine. That man was truly intimidating, but something about the way he looked at her felt different, as if he was trying to understand something he himself couldn't explain. On the other side of the building, Ji-ho entered his office and shut the door. For the first time in a long while, he felt distracted, and the cause of that distraction had a name: Yoon Hana. In the days following the hallway incident, Kang Ji-ho tried to push aside the unsettling presence of Yoon Hana in his mind. However, it seemed as though the universe was determined to cross their paths. Every time he walked through the company's corridors, his gaze would inadvertently land on her. She was like a detail in a painting once noticed, impossible to forget. Hana, on the other hand, did everything she could to remain invisible. The impact of that encounter with Ji-ho still weighed on her. Veteran employees had warned her not to attract the CEO's attention. "He's demanding, cold, and doesn't tolerate mistakes," they said. But that wasn't what unsettled her. What truly made her uncomfortable was his piercing gaze, as if he were trying to decipher a hidden enigma within her very existence. Then, an important meeting changed everything. A strategic merger between Kang Enterprises and a foreign conglomerate was under negotiation, and Ji-ho needed an efficient team to compile reports and organize documents. For reasons beyond her control, Hana was assigned to the project. She knew it was an opportunity for growth, but it also meant working directly with him. On the first day of the assignment, Hana entered the conference room carrying folders and a tablet. Jiho was already there, alone, reviewing documents. He looked up as she stepped inside, and for a moment, their eyes met. "Sit down." His voice was controlled, devoid of emotion. Hana swallowed hard and obeyed. Silence stretched between them as she organized the files on the table. The only sound in the room was the rustling of paper. Jiho, his expression unreadable, finally spoke. "Do you always work at this pace?" Hana looked up, surprised. "Sir, you're meticulous. That's rare." She couldn't tell if it was a compliment or just an indifferent observation, he continued. "I need these reports finalized by tomorrow. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." Jiho studied her for a moment longer than necessary. There was something about her that unsettled him, an effortless presence. A quiet competence that didn't demand attention yet commanded it anyway. He didn't like feeling distracted, and even less, not understanding why. That night, as Hana left the building late, she felt a brief sense of relief. But as she turned toward the bus stop, she noticed Jiho near the entrance, sitting inside his luxury car. Their eyes met once again. For a fraction of a second, it seemed like he wanted to say something. But then, without a word, he looked away and drove off. Hana's heartbeat quickened, though she didn't know why. Jiho, gripping the steering wheel, felt just as conflicted. For the first time in years, his mind wasn't entirely focused on business. Yoon Hana had become a distraction he couldn't ignore. Days passed, and Yoon Hana's presence became inevitable in Kang Jiho's life. Working together on the corporate merger, he found himself observing her more closely. Her professionalism and dedication were undeniable, but what intrigued him most was the effortless way she carried herself around him. There was no flattery, no excessive fear, just a quiet respect. However, it wasn't just business demanding his attention. Jiho was beginning to feel the weight of his family's expectations. His father, Kang Hyun-woo, a staunch traditionalist and business tycoon, summoned a family meeting to discuss his future. Jiho already knew what was coming, his parents' insistence that he accept an arranged marriage. At the lavish Kang family mansion, the dining table was a display of opulence. His mother, Kang Mi-ran, poured tea with graceful movements, while his father studied him with a calculating gaze. "Jiho, it's time to think about your future," Hyun-woo said. "The Choi family has a charming daughter. A marriage between you two would solidify our position in the market." Jiho set his teacup down, his expression unreadable. "I'm not interested in a marriage of convenience. You're never interested in anything that involves family. But the company isn't just yours, Jiho. It's a legacy, and you have responsibilities." His mother attempted to soften the tension. "We only want what's best for you, dear." Jiho pressed his lips together. He knew his family's concern was purely about business. His feelings had never been taken into account. Meanwhile, back at the company, Hana was dealing with a different kind of problem. Rumors had begun circulating about her proximity to the CEO. Employees whispered whenever she passed by, and some of her colleagues had started avoiding her altogether. During one of her breaks, she accidentally overheard a conversation in the cafeteria. "Did you see the way the CEO looks at her? That can't be normal. It must be an affair. People like her don't get ahead without help." Hana felt her face burn. She clenched her trembling hands and left quickly before they noticed her presence. Later that day, as she was organizing documents in the conference room, Jiho entered unannounced. She straightened her posture immediately. "Is something wrong?" he asked, noticing the weariness in her expression. Hana hesitated. She didn't want to involve Jiho in something so trivial, but part of her knew he would see through a lie. "Just gossip. It doesn't matter." Jiho frowned. "Who said something about you?" She shook her head. "It's nothing I can't handle." Jiho crossed his arms. Something stirred inside him. He couldn't allow Hana to be a target because of him. But why did he care so much? That question haunted him for the rest of the day. He knew that soon he would have to make a choice, yield to his family's pressures or carve out his own path. But one thing was certain, wasn't about to let Yoon Hana be hurt. And maybe, just maybe, that meant his feelings for her were already deeper than he was willing to admit. The weight of family expectations and the relentless gossip in the company had finally taken its toll. Kang Jiho knew he was being pressured into accepting an arranged marriage. but his mind was elsewhere. No matter how much he tried to focus on work, his thoughts always drifted back to Yoon Hana. As much as he resisted, it was undeniably couldn't ignore her. That week, tensions reached their peak. During an important meeting with investors, Ji-ho noticed Hana looking unsettled. The whispers and rumors surrounding her had intensified, and he knew his family wouldn't remain silent for much longer. As if confirming his suspicions, at the end of the meeting, his mother appeared in his office accompanied by Choi Minna, the heiress his family wanted him to marry. "Ji-ho, you've been avoiding us," Mi-ran said, elegantly adjusting the sleeve of her coat. "It's time you met Minna properly." Minna offered a polite smile, but there was a calculated glint in her eyes. "Your father mentioned you've been very busy lately, but I do hope we can talk soon." A growing unease settled in Ji-ho's chest. He had expected his family to take more drastic measures to force him into their plans, but he wasn't prepared for how quickly they were closing in. At the same time, Hana was facing an unexpected confrontation of her own. She had been summoned to a meeting by the Director of Human Resources. The moment she entered the room, her heart pounded at the sight of Kang Hyun-woo, Ji-ho's father, seated across from her with an unrelenting stare. "Do you know why you're here, Miss Yoon?" Hyun-woo's voice was cold and deliberate. Hana swallowed hard but maintained her composure. "No, sir." Hyun-woo studied her for a moment before sliding an envelope across the table toward her. "You're a smart woman. You must realize the disruption your presence has caused. We're willing to offer you a generous compensation package in exchange for your immediate resignation." For a moment, the world seemed to tilt around her. Hana looked down at the envelope, then back at the man who, without hesitation, was attempting to buy her disappearance. A painful mix of humiliation and fury swelled in her chest. "I've done nothing wrong." Her voice was quiet but unwavering. Hyun-woo's lips curved into a humorless smile. "This isn't about what you've done, but about what you represent. Someone like you has no place beside my son." Hana felt her eyes sting, but she refused to let him see her break. With trembling hands, she pushed the envelope back toward him. "I won't take money to disappear, but if my presence is a problem, I'll take care of it myself." She stood up, and with a heart-shattering resolve, handed over her resignation letter. By the time Ji-ho found out, it was too late. He rushed to the department, but Hana's workspace was already empty. Desperation clawed at him as he grabbed his phone to call Heronly to find that her number was no longer in service. A deep, unfamiliar pain settled in his chest. For the first time in his life, Kang Ji-ho understood what it meant to lose something that truly mattered, and he wasn't ready to accept it. In the days following Hana's departure, Kang Ji-ho realized just how essential her presence had been. The office felt empty, cold, devoid of the small gestures she used to make, ones he hadn't even noticed before. The coffee she would leave on his desk before meetings, the perfectly organized files, the quiet way she filled the spaces between his rigidity and the real world. But now she was gone, and he knew exactly why. Fury overtook him. Ji-ho drove straight to his parents' house, ignoring the glances of the staff, as he entered with firm, determined strides. "You made her leave, didn't you?" His voice was cold but laced with tension. Hyun-woo looked at him without surprise, merely adjusting his posture in his leather chair. It was the best decision for everyone. She understood that herself. Ji-ho felt his jaw clench. His own family, the people who were supposed to support him, had taken from him something he hadn't even realized he needed so desperately. "You crossed the line." His voice was low, but unshakable. "And if you think I'm just going to accept this, you're wrong." Mi-ran sighed, trying to maintain her composure. "Ji-ho, there is no future between you and that girl. She doesn't belong in our world." He let out a humorless laugh. "If our world means manipulation, control, and loneliness, then maybe I don't want to be part of it anymore." Without waiting for a response, he walked out. He knew there was no more time to waste. Hana was trying to rebuild her life away from the corporate world. She had found a temporary job at a small cafe in a quiet neighborhood, far from the office towers and judgmental stares. But no matter how much she tried to move on, her mind kept drifting back to the company, back to him. One evening, after a long shift, she stepped out of the cafe and froze. A familiar figure was waiting on the sidewalk. Kang Ji-ho stood there, dressed in his impeccable dark suit, but his expression was different, vulnerable. "You left without saying anything to me." His voice was a mixture of pain and accusation. Hana lowered her gaze. "I didn't want you to have to choose between me and your family." Ji-ho took a step closer. "But I chose." She looked up, startled. "What?" He took a deep breath before speaking. "I chose you, Hana." For a moment, she was speechless. Then Ji-ho continued, "I can't undo what my family did, but I can make sure they never interfere in my life again. I resigned from the company." Hana's eyes widened. "What? But that company is your life." He smiled slightly. "No, Hana. My life is whatever I choose it to be, and I choose you." Her heart pounded. Everything she had heard, every hardship, every obstacle seemed to fade in that moment. Ji-ho took her hands in his, holding them firmly. "I don't know how to be a perfect man, but I know I want to try with you, if you still want this too." Hana smiled, feeling tears well up in her eyes. She had never imagined that Kang Ji-ho, the impenetrable CEO, would give up everything for love. But here he was, offering her not wealth or status, but something infinitely more precious, his truth. "I've always wanted this," she whispered. Ji-ho smiled before pulling her into a tight embrace, finally feeling like he was exactly where he was meant to be. But this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a new journey together. Months later, Kang Ji-ho and Yoon Hana stood before the altar. The sun was setting gently over the luxurious garden where the ceremony was taking place. White flowers and delicate lights created a fairy tale setting, but nothing was more breathtaking than the expression on Ji-ho's face as he watched Hana walk toward him, dressed in white. He had never imagined his fate would change so drastically. Once, he had lived solely for business, for his family's expectations. Now the only thing that mattered was the woman about to become his wife. Hana in turn felt her heart overflowing. She remembered the first day she had collided with Ji-ho at the company, the feeling of insignificance she had carried. Now, she was no longer just an employee. She was his equal, his partner, the woman he had chosen to love. When they reached the altar, Ji-ho took her hand firmly and smiled. "Are you sure about this? There's still time to run?" He joked, trying to mask the emotion in his voice. Hana laughed softly, her eyes shining. "If I ran, you would come after me." He nodded, leaning in slightly. "Always." The officiant began the ceremony, and when it was time for their vows, Ji-ho took a deep breath before speaking. "For years, I believed love was a distraction, that emotions were a weakness. But then you appeared and turned everything upside down. I tried to resist, I tried to deny it, but in the end, I realized you are the most important thing in my life. I promise to stand by your side, through good days and bad, because you are my home." Tears glistened in Hana's eyes, and she smiled before answering. "I never thought I would find someone like you. A man who, despite his impenetrable exterior, has a heart capable of loving so intensely. Thank you for choosing me, Ji-ho. I promise to be your partner, your friend, and your love, today and always." The officiant's voice echoed through the garden. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Ji-ho didn't wait for anything else. He cupped Hana's face and kissed her a kiss filled with emotion, with everything they had endured to get to this moment. The guests erupted in applause, but for them, the entire world had disappeared. There was only each other. Years later, Ji-ho and Hana's life looked completely different. He had built his own company, free from his family's control, and Hana managed a charity project to support young professionals. But the biggest change was inside their home. In the garden of their residence, Ji-ho held a little girl with dark hair in his arms. Their daughter, Kang Soo-jin, giggled as he played with her. Hana watched the scene, her heart overflowing. Ji-ho, the man who had once been cold and distant, was now a devoted father and a loving husband. He looked at her and smiled that smile that only she knew. "I would still choose you, Hana. Always." She walked toward him and embraced her family, knowing that after everything they had been through, they had achieved something far greater than wealth or status. They had found true love,